Welcome to Tuesday Talks on Facebook Live with Adrienne Miller. I'm Adrienne Miller. I'm the President and CEO of Women for Sobriety, and today we are continuing our Sister Skills series, and today's sister skill is active listening. So, active listening is a great tool to use when you're working in a group environment like we do here at Women for Sobriety. And, primarily we think of active listening as something that we use like in person when we're sitting in a room with someone else. But we can also use a lot of these active listening skills in Zoom meetings especially, but also in chat meetings and even our online interactions like the forum or on our feeds, like our Facebook feeds or any other feeds. So this is a good skill to have no matter how you're supporting others in the WFS program. So what is active listening? Active listening is a practice of really listening to understand and to communicate that other's understanding so that the person who's speaking feels fully heard and seen. And so I think it's helpful to kind of think about what's the opposite of active listening, right? So let's define it first second by what it's not, right? It's not half paying attention and looking around and kind of paying attention. It's not interrupting or trying to fill in the blanks before someone says something. If we're taking things at face value, we might not be really actively listening, right? So if we're kind of getting caught in the details and ignoring the big picture of what the person is sharing, we might not be active listening. If our body language is distracted, even if we're fully paying attention, if we're looking down and, fidgeting on our phone or whatever, that might give the impression that we're not active listening. I know I'm guilty of this sometimes, listening to plan what I'm going to say next, right? So I'm so busy thinking about what am I going to say next that I forget to listen to what the person in front of me is actually saying. Practicing impatience or rushing the speaker along the same lines as interrupting, or maybe just ignoring what you don't understand or what makes you uncomfortable, right? It's really easy for us to oh wow, that statement hits a little too close to home for me, so I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear that, right? So all of these things, which are kind of opposite to active listening, are things we want to avoid when we're interacting in our peer support environments at Women for Sobriety. And really, those things are all things that invalidate the speaker's kind of feelings and perhaps even the speaker's sense of self-worth, right? And so, of course, the New Life program is all about building up self-confidence, self-worth, and learning to think more positively about things. So if the person you're talking to is not active listening, you might not feel like that's a big bolster to your self-esteem. So that's what's in it for the other person, but what's in it for you, right, as the listener? And I think that by fully being present for somebody else's share, we're really practicing caring and compassion, right, which are two of our 4 C's. And the more we practice giving it, we know that all love given returns. So the more we give it, hopefully the more that we'll get it back, either from the person that we're listening to or from someone else in the future. Really being fully present for other group members can really help build connection. And so when you need support, that connection is that much stronger. So the support from that person will feel that much greater. And you're also pretty likely to learn stuff about yourself when you really fully engage in listening to others, right? Have you ever been listening to a story and kind of the example I gave earlier, right? And someone says something, you're like, ooh, wow, that sounds like something I do, right? And then by listening to how the other person is maybe interpreting their feelings or their actions, it might help give you some insight about your own stuff. So active listening isn't just great for the other person, but it's great for you as well. So what are some tips and tricks on how to really stay engaged and practice active listening? The number one thing that you want to do when you're active listening is try to stay neutral and non-judgmental. That doesn't mean unempathetic, but it means, not trying to decide if what the person did was right or wrong, or if they're talking about something that somebody else did, not trying to decide whether what that other person did was right or wrong, but just listening and just absorbing the story or the information that's being shared with you. I brought this up last time when we were talking about alternatives to advice on our last Sister Skills video, but practicing comfort with silence. That's a really important key to active listening. And again, it's avoiding interrupting, it's avoiding kind of rushing someone else. When we are allowed to pause in the middle of a share, we're really going a little bit deeper, typically, right? Someone is digging a little bit deeper, they're contemplating just a little bit more. And so if we rush in to fill those silences, we're probably going to be cutting off that other person's processing. So really making sure that before you jump in, to make sure that someone's silence means that they're actually done sharing and not just that they're kind of thinking about the next thing to say. Body language is really, really important in active listening. And I've noticed this trend on Zoom that we often come to Zoom meetings and we're making lunch for the kids for the next day, or making a cup of coffee, or whatever you're doing during Zoom meetings. And I just want to encourage everyone to just set aside your sacred time for meetings and don't do other things while you're at a meeting. It's really a time that you're setting aside for yourself and your recovery. And so even if you're on Zoom, just let yourself be fully present. That being said, I love Zoom meetings because what you can't see is that often underneath the screen, I am crocheting. I am a fidgeter. I have a little ADHD. And so fidgeting, I even have some fidget toys on my desk that I can play with. Sometimes I'll play with a rubber band or something. And it actually helps me pay attention. I don't know, it's something about ADHD that helps people pay attention. And there's all kinds of other reasons that people might pay better attention when they're fidgeting. And the traditional rule for WFS meetings is that we don't do any of those distractions like handwork or crocheting or knitting or anything. And I would posit to you that maybe that's not the worst thing if it's going to help you concentrate. And, if it's okay with everyone else in the group. I have brought actually crochet to live face-to-face meetings before. And I let people know, hey, I'm feeling really anxious today. I really feel like I will benefit from crocheting during this meeting. Is that okay with everyone else? And because it's actually enhancing my attention span and not taking away from my ability to pay attention to others, I think that's okay. And I think if you have a really hard time sitting still and listening, it might be worth having that conversation with your group, or if you're even just meeting with a friend one-on-one, ask them about that. So what are some other body language things that we can do to show that we're active listening? Making eye contact, of course, if it's culturally appropriate, which in the U.S. it generally is. Smiling, or maybe even frowning, or maybe even looking a little sad. If the person is sharing something that's really sad and difficult, you probably shouldn't be smiling at them through that. But kind of mirroring their mood, right? Nodding, or even shaking your head if they're talking about something that they really don't appreciate. Shake your head, nod your head. that kind of thing can really, really be helpful. Body language too, sitting back with your arms crossed can feel really closed off to people. If someone's really digging deep, even just leaning forward and really looking engaged can be really helpful to someone who's making themselves very vulnerable. And there are some things that we can do too that are kind of along the lines of body language when we're interacting in the group in writing, right? So we can say, hey, I really hear your sadness in your share, or something like that, right? So you can, when you're writing, you can reflect back some of those emotions in writing before you launch into whatever else you want to share. Or even just to say, like, wow, that sounds really hard. I'm really, I really hope that everything turns out okay for you. And sometimes that's a great response to an online post where someone's struggling. Another active listening tool is asking clarifying questions. And I put a caveat here, right? Because you don't want to ask what I call curiosity questions, right? So ask yourself, before you ask a question in group or online or whatever, ask yourself, why am I asking this question? Is it just because I'm curious? And if it's just because you're curious, then it's probably not a question that you should ask. But if it's a question to get some understanding from the speaker, right? Hey, what did you mean by that? Right? That can be a really useful question to ask. And sometimes asking questions can help kind of direct a speaker to kind of reflect a little bit more on something that they shared that maybe they just sailed right past, maybe an uncomfortable emotion. To ask them a question like, hey, wait, you said that made you really sad, and then you just kind of went on, like, how sad? Like, that does sound sad to me. Like, is that hard for you to admit that you feel sad? It's a perfectly viable question. And my last tip is actually, this is borrowed active listening skills from a system or a method called motivational interviewing. It's something that counselors use a lot. And of course, you're not a counselor, and don't expect you to be a counselor just as a peer in a peer support group. Even our facilitators are still just peers in our peer support group. But it's got a fun little acronym, and so I thought I'd share it. So the acronym is OARS, and these are active listening skills. So they're O for open-ended questions, A for affirmations, R for reflections, and S for summarizing. So again, OARS, and it's open-ended questions, right? Really any question that's not yes or no. And again, avoiding curiosity questions, but open-ended questions that are designed to help someone think a little bit further about what they're sharing about, or maybe to help them gain some insight into what they're sharing about. Affirmations, really affirming people's feelings as valid, even if they're uncomfortable. Like we said before, like, gosh, that sounds really sad. I think I would be sad too if I was facing that. Or, yeah, it sounds like you're really struggling with early sobriety. I really struggled with early sobriety too. I totally understand what you're talking about. I felt that way too, my second day of sobriety. Right? So those are affirmations, affirming people and their feelings. Reflections are kind of repeating back or rephrasing what someone said, either to demonstrate an understanding or maybe to provide an opportunity for them to gain or further insight. I kind of gave an example earlier, like, gosh, you said that is really sad. What about that feels really sad to you? So reflecting back what people are saying. And then the last one, S, for summarize. So especially at the end of a long share, or if someone's share is really going on and getting a little bit off topic, and you want to help the group kind of come back to the topic at hand or refocus on kind of the recovery centric part of the share. Can be really helpful to just kind of summarize the main points, bring the group back to the bigger picture, and you can often just end it with, gosh, I remember feeling that way, or asking someone like, hey, have you ever felt that way, right? So summarizing can really help someone feel heard, and is a really great way to kind of redirect. And even if you're not a facilitator and you're like, it's not my job to redirect the conversation, well, I would say we're all a part of the group. And if you're in a group and someone's going on and on, why not help out the facilitator in that way? Remember, your facilitators in WFS are peers just like you. They're women just like you. And if you do a little summary statement and then, hey, and that reminds me of the time use it as an opportunity to move the meeting along, I don't think that's a really bad thing. It can take some practice, but I think we're all responsible for our group. And hopefully the sister skills are going to help you feel a little bit more comfortable taking a little bit of responsibility for the group and how everyone interacts in the group and how to move forward. So that is my little sister skills, active listening spiel. I hope you got some helpful tips. If you have questions, you can leave them in the chat box. I will try to come back and answer any of those that you might have. And next week, we actually have another interview. Our special guest, Dr. Sarah Zemore, she is doing the Peer Alternatives 2 study, which is interested in comparing outcomes for people who participate in Alcoholics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, LifeRing, and Women for Sobriety. And it's actually a study that we participated in quite a few years ago, and they're replicating it to expand their data set. And so it's a really great opportunity to help build some evidence for WFS so that we can go to all the counselors and doctors and lawyers in the world and say, hey, we have this great program that's just as effective as anything else. So send your women to us, and we will actively listen and help them get sober however we can. So that's next week, and thanks for coming, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Okay, bye-bye.